Women have it easy. Just say you're going through menopause, and you can take a break from work and chores.
I couldn't hide my intense anger at my husband Elliot's words right in front of me. The changes that started appearing in my body after I turned 50. It was 2 years ago when I was diagnosed with menopause. For these 2 years, I've been suffering from various symptoms, like dizziness, palpitations, and hot flashes. Even though I'm receiving treatment at the hospital, it's only easing the symptoms, not curing them. Despite living in the same house and seeing my condition, Elliot has never tried to understand my illness.
Dizziness? Easily tired. Back pain? Everyone gets that when they get older. And you, calling it menopause or whatever, taking off work, and just sleeping all day at home. Wow, I'm jealous.
Elliot hurled these words at me, unable to even stand up due to my dizziness. He maliciously perceived my decision to take a leave of absence, advised by the doctor, as taking advantage of a trivial illness. Elliot has repeatedly hurled insults and sarcasm at my illness that shows no signs of healing. But this day was different. Elliot looked down at me with a look of utter disgust and laughed nastily.
If you have the time to show off how hard your illness is, why don't you at least do the housework a wife should do?
I am Anita, 52 years old. I live with my husband Elliot, who is 3 years older than me. Elliot and I met through a common acquaintance in our late 20s and immediately hit it off. We continued to date smoothly and got married in our early 30s. We had occasional minor fights, but Elliot was kind, and we managed to live a peaceful life while working hard at our jobs. We don't have children, but I believe we've always been supportive and close as a couple. However, a significant change appeared in our marriage a few years ago. I continued to work as a full-time employee even after marriage, but currently I'm on a leave of absence. The reason is poor health. More specifically, I started experiencing symptoms of menopause in my late 40s, which made me prone to falling ill. Initially, it was mainly irregular menstrual cycles and sudden feelings of heat and fatigue. But as time passed, the symptoms worsened with severe palpitations and sleepless nights. Gradually, I began to feel irritable and depressed for no apparent reason, affecting my mental health. Menopause can bring various symptoms for about 10 years, from before to after menopause. I had heard about it, but experiencing it myself was more challenging than I had imagined. My symptoms were particularly severe, and despite the advice of my family, the condition didn't improve even after visiting the hospital. The doctor said that there is no specific cure for menopause, and symptomatic treatment is a primary approach. So I've been using prescribed medication and herbal remedies tailored to my severe symptoms. But there's no cure. It became difficult to continue working, so I decided to take a leave of absence when I turned 50, 2 years ago. My company's leave policy is up to 3 years, and soon I will have to decide whether to return to work or retire. I don't want to quit my job, but there's no sign of my symptoms subsiding, and I feel frustrated about possibly having to consider retirement. However, if I end up quitting, I have no idea what Elliot would say. Initially, when I started suffering from menopause, Elliot was concerned and attentive. He wasn't the type to take the lead in household chores, but he used to care when I was unwell. I thought he was a kind person, but as soon as he realized my health issue might drag on, he started looking at me with irritation. When I discussed taking a temporary leave from work with Elliot, he didn't like the idea.
I don't understand much about your health, but is it so bad that you need to take a leave? You're not just slacking off and relaxing at home, right?
I was shocked when he said that. Men also go through menopause, but Elliot, despite having a chronic illness, rarely fell ill. He's always been careful to maintain his health to prevent his condition from worsening, so he probably sees me, who continues to be unwell, as lazy. That's evident from how he responds no matter how much I explain my symptoms.
So, what's the plan to improve? If that method doesn't work, Shouldn't you look for another? Why do you keep saying it's not getting better? If it's not healing, find a way to heal.
He seemed far from understanding, but continuing to work in my current condition is tough. When I pleaded for a leave of absence until my health stabilized, Elliot, as expected, got furious. However, after I told him that not only my boss, but also my colleagues and juniors had asked me to take a break, he reluctantly agreed, though still displeased. I had decided to do more housework while not working, but there were times when I suddenly felt ill and couldn't get up. Standing brought on dizziness, and even sitting down didn't stop the sweating, perhaps due to hot flashes. Still, when I tried to vacuum, despite the difficulty, merciless back pain would strike. No matter how much I endured and took medicine, trying to do housework whenever I could move a bit, Elliot still didn't understand.
Aren't you better yet? What's the point of going to the hospital?
It was predictable, but gradually he began to treat me coldly.
Stop being so dependent. If you're at home all day because of your leave, why don't you finish all the housework during the day? It's not like you're unwell from morning till night. Coming home to no greeting, dinner just cut up and heated up. What are you doing at home all day?
And it wasn't just once or twice that I got such complaints from Elliot when he returned from work. I was shocked by his attitude, sighing tiredly. On weekends, when he was at home,
stop lying down all the time. Do the laundry at least.
And I was feeling unwell and lying down. I even got yelled at. The sarcasm and complaints from Elliot increased day by day, and words of care and concern disappeared. While his terrible attitude hurt me, I also increasingly worried whether my symptoms would ever heal, if a time would come when I really got better. However, fortunately, my mother-in-law Cassie and sister-in-law Natalie, who lived in the same town, understood my condition and sometimes gave me advice, which was very helpful. Cassie is over 80, but still robust and lively, speaking clearly and energetically. Her husband has passed away, and she lives with Natalie and her husband. Cassie and Natalie were the ones who advised me to go to the hospital and were the first to suggest taking a leave if it got too bad. I'm truly grateful to them, as both my parents have passed away, and they're the ones who care about my menopausal symptoms. One day,
we're going to have a dinner party at our house next weekend for Mom's birthday,
Elliot said. In Elliot's family, it's tradition once childhood to have a big dinner party for family birthdays. Since marrying Elliot, I've participated every year. Depending on the year, we either went out for dinner or had a party at the in-laws' house. But this year, Cassie's birthday celebration was to be held at our place. Of course, that meant I was in charge of the meal. On the day, Cassie and Natalie were supposed to come in the evening, and Natalie's husband couldn't make it due to work.
Make sure you're in good shape on the day,
Elliot said, glaring at me sharply.
I won't tolerate it if it's like last year.
I understand. I could only nod in front of Elliot's aggressive attitude. Last year, on Cassie's birthday, I felt ill and missed the party at the in-laws' house. Elliot seemed to think he was made a fool of and berated me harshly when he returned home. I remember crying from the pain of that time. So this time, I want to be in good condition on the day of the dinner, as Elliot said. However, if it were a condition that could be controlled just by wanting it, I wouldn't have been suffering for years. Hoping for a day when I felt a little better, I started preparing little by little. Cassie would be turning 85 at her next birthday. Wanting to show my gratitude for all she has done, I vowed to pour my soul into preparing dinner for everyone. With the in-laws coming over, there was a lot to do besides preparing the meal. Elliot has a bit of a show-off side, so he wouldn't be satisfied unless the entire house was cleaned from corner to corner. I cleaned the house meticulously over several days, consulting my physical condition. Elliot didn't help with the housework at all, just relaxing in the living room but I was used to it. It seems that younger people nowadays do housework, but in Elliot's generation, housework is a wife's job. Especially since Elliot, who thinks I'm just lazing around at home all day, wouldn't help. Then, after finishing the shopping for the dinner party the day before, I went to bed early. I closed my eyes, praying it was just a mild symptom. However, on the day of the dinner party, I had the worst timing, as I suffered from a terrible headache and dizziness right from the morning. When I tried to get out of bed, my vision blurred, and I had to close my eyes involuntarily. Then, I heard a violent ringing in my ears, and felt as if my head was being beaten with severe pain. It was especially bad, even for my recent condition. Still, I managed to get out of bed clumsily, only to be greeted by Elliot's loud sigh from above. When he realized I couldn't possibly prepare breakfast, he grabbed his wallet and phone and headed for the door. And then,
I'm going to grab some food. And since I feel sick around you, I'll go to Mom's place early. Make sure you have dinner ready when we get back,
he said coldly and left the house. Sure, today was the day Elliot planned to pick up Cassie and Natalie, but dropping by this afternoon must be an inconvenience for them too. His harsh words hurt me, but I couldn't stay down forever. I just drank some jelly drink, took my medicine, and laid down in the living room until my condition settled. But my health hardly improved by the afternoon. The medication eased the headache, but standing up caused dizziness and made me stagger. I needed to start preparing dinner, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I stood in the kitchen for short periods, taking breaks, but time was relentlessly approaching. Feeling at my limit, I tried calling Elliot, but there was no answer. So I sent him a text, but he didn't reply. Eventually, it was 5 p.m., and I was still halfway done when Elliot returned home with Cassie and the others. Elliot, entering the living room, looked at me sitting in the kitchen with a puzzled expression.
No welcome for Mom and the others? Is dinner ready? Nothing is set up,
he said, and I was at a loss for words. The bread was baked, and I had torn some leafy vegetables and added tomatoes, making a salad. But that was about all I had prepared. The thought of being scolded again made my heart race and breathing difficult, but I decided to apologize and tell the truth. Elliot, I'm sorry. This is all I could do. I'm sorry, but could you please order something nice for the main course? I'm really sorry, I said. And Elliot's face turned red as he changed his attitude dramatically.
Are you kidding me with this sickness act now? We were looking forward to this dinner. Mom was so excited. And here you are, making me look bad again, just like last year.
Elliot shouted angrily at me. It's not that. I'm not trying to.
Isn't it obvious? You can't even manage your own health at your age. It's pathetic. You make everyone else suffer because of your own problems.
Elliot continued to berate me without listening. Then why didn't you answer the phone? I sent you a text to eat out. I even sent another text 3 minutes ago for delivery. Why do you insist on eating at home when you don't do anything? My frustration exploded, and I shouted back loudly. Each word I spoke felt like my head was being hit with a metal bat. My vision was so blurred, I could hardly see Elliot's face. I couldn't hear anything over my own voice and heartbeat, and I was sweating profusely from the heat. The symptoms I had been managing with medication all came back stronger, and I regretted not keeping quiet, but I couldn't help but tell Elliot. When my vision finally cleared a bit and I caught Elliot's gaze, he was staring at me in stunned silence with his mouth open. Then, as our eyes met, his face turned bright red, and he pointed at me angrily.
What's with that attitude? Pretending to be sick and not doing housework? And getting angry when pointed out? You're the worst. I'm sick of supporting a wife who's a failure at housekeeping. If you can't handle housework, we're getting a divorce.
He yelled loud enough to be heard outside. All my desperate pleading had no effect on Elliot. After all these years, he brought up divorce without hesitation, and I felt so miserable I was on the verge of tears. Divorce seemed inevitable. I was about to reply in agreement when I heard light footsteps, but Elliot, in his rage, probably didn't notice.
Menopause. What's that about? Getting tired easily? Having shoulder pains? Aren't these things normal for our age? Dizziness and headaches can't be that bad, even with medication. You just want to lie in bed all day, don't you?
Elliot spat these words at me before someone tapped him on the shoulder from behind. It was Natalie, my sister-in-law. With an anger I'd never seen before, Natalie raised her right hand the moment Elliot turned around and struck his cheek with a forceful slap. Elliot, hit by a right straight punch that was hard to believe came from a 60-year-old woman, fell to the floor, looking up at Natalie with a face that couldn't comprehend what had just happened.
Sis, what the heck are you doing?
Elliot, rubbing his cheek in confusion, was met with Natalie's sharp gaze. Then she said,
And what about you? What's with the attitude? Have you been treating Anita like this for years? Deciding the severity of someone's illness without being a doctor? Verbally abusing your wife? You should be ashamed.
Natalie shouted, furious. Elliot, who tries to show a good face in front of the family, doesn't treat me harshly. Even when he was despising me with disdainful eyes as I suffered from dizziness, he became considerate of my health the moment Natalie visited, even making coffee himself. I had consulted Cassie and Natalie about my illness, but never about Elliot's behavior. They are caring people, but if I spoke ill of Elliot, their blood relative, they might harbor ill will towards me. They haven't seen how Elliot treats me harshly, so they might not believe me. Even if they did believe and sympathize, I couldn't speak out thinking of how Elliot might attack me afterwards. But seeing Natalie's actions now, I might have been wrong.
What's going on? Today is Mom's birthday party, and I wanted to make it enjoyable. But it's this guy who ruined the dinner party by not preparing anything.
Elliot, standing up, pointed at me and continued to blame. Then Cassie, who came to the living room with Natalie, glared at Elliot.
Are you saying Anita ruined the dinner party? That's just your opinion, right? From what I heard, Anita was trying her best to prepare despite her pain. She contacted you because it didn't seem like she could make it in time, asking to change the venue or order delivery. I don't appreciate being celebrated by someone who's unwell. I'm not even slightly happy being celebrated by a son who just complains after dumping everything on his sick wife.
Cassie said this to Elliot firmly. Then Natalie.
Did you come to our house leaving Anita alone while she was feeling ill? Asked. Well, there's nothing I could do.
There are many things you could do, like helping with chores or being considerate about her health. I remember telling you this when Anita started feeling unwell. You just found it bothersome, didn't you? Stung by Natalie's words, Elliot was at a loss for words. After I started feeling unwell, Natalie had told Elliot to be more considerate of me, but as his usual behavior showed, he didn't heed her words.
Why are Sis and Mom siding with her? Menopause isn't even a real illness. Getting tired easily, palpitations that happens to everyone as they age. Women just want to be lazy, so they can name it a disorder and pretend to be sick.
Elliot continued, trying to justify himself. Natalie sighed and began to explain. Elliot, you might not know, but I too suffered from severe menopause symptoms. It's only recently settled down, but it was so bad I quit my job 10 years ago. Are you really saying a disease that made me quit my job isn't a real illness? Hearing Natalie's words, Elliot stood frozen in shock. When I first started showing symptoms of menopause, I talked to Natalie and learned that she had suffered from menopausal disorders around the same age as me, and eventually had to resign from her job after a temporary leave. She didn't want to quit, but as there was no sign of recovery, She decided to put her health first after consulting with her family. I knew Natalie had quit her job around 50, but I didn't know the reason until she told me herself. Come to think of it, I hadn't met Natalie around that time. We basically communicated via text, as she couldn't meet due to her poor health. It was really tough back then. I thought it would never get better, but Stanley told me to quit my job and take a rest. Stanley is Natalie's husband. He's 5 years younger than Natalie, and his job has irregular hours and night shifts, so he couldn't make it to the dinner. Though we don't meet often, I remember him as a kind man who always cares about my health. Natalie, with such a gentle husband, pleaded desperately with Elliot. Anita is not your servant. Shouldn't you, as a husband, have more compassion?
Sorry, sis. I knew you were unwell before, but I didn't know it was for that reason.
Elliot replied, sounding like an excuse, but Natalie's expression remained stern. Right now, it's not about me. Shouldn't you be apologizing to Anita, not me? Natalie said firmly, and Elliot reluctantly turned to face me. Elliot loves Natalie, so he usually can't go against what she says. Eventually, he gave up and apologized to me.
I'm sorry. Sis scolded me, and it opened my eyes. From now on, I'll help you, Anita, and we'll get along.
He said sincerely, looking into my eyes, and I thought he finally understood. I was about to forgive Elliot when... Hold on a minute. A voice interjected. It was Cassie. Looking tired from standing, she came to the sofa supported by Natalie and sat next to me. She looked me in the eye and said, Anita, you can't believe Elliot's words. You should divorce him quickly. What? What do you mean? I asked in surprise, and Cassie shared a past experience. Actually, I suffered from similar symptoms around your age. There wasn't a name like menopausal disorder back then, but from what you've told me, I think I probably had it too. I've told you this before, haven't I? I nodded slightly to Cassie's words. When Cassie was around my age, the term menopausal disorder was not widely recognized. There were no medications, and it was hard to get understanding from others. Cassie chuckled sadly and pointed at Elliot. Elliot used to hurl terrible abuses at me when I was suffering. It was around the time before he married you, I think. He was living at his parents' house and would say things like, "Make dinner faster. How long will you lie in bed, mother? Stop pretending to be sick." Such heartless words. Cassie's face looked pained, as if remembering those times. Elliot, is that true? I asked Elliot, wanting to believe him, but he awkwardly turned away. His silence and lack of denial meant that everything Cassie said was true. Cassie looked down, sorrowfully, and continued. My late husband got so angry at Elliot's behavior back then that he hit him. And when Dad scolded him severely, Elliot said the exact same thing he's saying now. He woke up. Indeed, after that, Elliot stopped saying anything to me, because he quickly married you and left home. But Anita, you've been mistreated by him, haven't you? In other words, Elliot hasn't changed at all since then. He still doesn't try to understand others' illnesses, even after decades. Calmly stating this, Natalie insisted that Elliot's words were just excuses for the moment.
What? Wait a minute. I mean, I won't do it again, believe me.
Elliot tried to interject, but Natalie grabbed his arm to stop him. I saw it all back then. That's why I hit you, just like Dad did. Remember how you cried and apologized to me after Dad scolded you? You said you wouldn't do it again, that you had woken up and realized your mistake. But now you're doing the same thing to Anita that you did to me before. It's too convenient to say believe me after doing the same thing twice. It's unbelievable. With Natalie's admonishment, Elliot bit his lip in frustration. As Elliot fell silent, Cassie grabbed my shoulders and said, That's why you need to divorce Elliot and escape quickly, otherwise you'll continue to suffer. Now's your chance with me and Natalie here. Alone with you, he'll never admit his faults. You might even get angry for embarrassing him in front of his parents. Her eyes were filled with determination. It was sad to hear such words from a mother. The thought of divorce at this age was daunting, but after hearing Cassie's story, I felt I couldn't continue with Elliot. Despite the harsh treatment I had endured, believing that once my symptoms subsided, we could live happily as before, but I realized it would probably only get worse. Anger surged within me as I thought about Elliot's past verbal abuse towards Cassie. I stood up, enduring my ongoing dizziness, and looked straight at Elliot to express my intention to divorce. Elliot shaking off Natalie's hand.
"What the hell? Are you all treating me as the bad guy?"
exclaimed. Everyone in the room looked at Elliot with cold eyes. Being scorned even by his relatives, Elliot turned red with rage. Then he said,
"Fine, I get it. If you say so, I'll divorce you."
In his anger, he agreed to the divorce. The dinner party was canceled. Cassie and the others went home, and Elliot stayed at a hotel. Our divorce proceeded without any disputes over property division, and was finalized smoothly. Soon after, I separated from Elliot and focused on recovering my health alone. Half a year later, having had no contact since, I received a call from Elliot. I had moved out, rented an apartment, and lived alone, regularly visiting the hospital. I was feeling less stressed and healthier, but Elliot's call gave me a bad feeling. As expected, Elliot's call was utterly selfish. He had a chronic illness that worsened after our divorce and living alone. However, he had always boasted about perfectly managing his health himself. He had even berated me, claiming I was a lazy person who didn't really want to get better because my symptoms weren't improving. "Why is that happening? You can manage your own health perfectly, right?" I replied, but I knew the reason. Elliot's idea of self-management was shallow, just choosing balanced meals from what I prepared. He never cooked from scratch because I had planned the menus considering his health. Moreover, Elliot, who never did any housework, had a terrible lifestyle in the past 6 months, relying on delivery or ready meals, not vacuuming, leading to a decline in living conditions. Such an unhealthy diet and unsanitary environment would indeed ruin anyone's health.
"I can't live like this anymore, so I want you to take care of me. It's been half a year. Your illness must be cured by now, right?"
Elliot said without any remorse. Apparently, he first turned to Natalie and Cassie, but Natalie was already busy caring for Cassie and couldn't help. Elliot, desperate, contacted me. Though I wanted to refuse, he was my former husband of many years. I wanted to ignore him, knowing everything.
"Then at least look at these albums I found in the storage. If you don't need them, I'll throw them away."
But Elliot said. Believing they were old photos, I hesitated. Though I've had enough of him now, back then, my relationship with Elliot was good, and there were pictures with Cassie's family too. Deciding to go and select my own photos, I visited our former home for the first time in half a year. The house we'd lived in until 6 months ago seemed dirtier than before, perhaps due to lack of cleaning. Leftover takeout containers cluttered the table, making me grimace involuntarily.
"You know, without you here, I don't have time to clean. It's hard to move when I feel bad."
Elliot made excuses without any provocation. While he claimed to feel unwell, he seemed quite energetic at a glance. Moreover, despite wanting care, what Elliot really seemed to need was someone to clean, do laundry, and prepare meals. It just seemed like he wanted a housekeeper. After a moment of thought, "You don't look injured and seem quite healthy. Why don't you stop being lazy and take care of yourself?" I said. Elliot narrowed his eyes sullenly and retorted,
"You know my illness affects my internal organs and nerves, right? Don't judge by appearances. It's outrageous that you call me lazy when I'm suffering so much."
He spat these words out. Seeing my cold gaze, Elliot visibly became unsettled. Then he stopped moving abruptly. With widened eyes, he took a deep breath and apologized to me.
I said those harsh things to you when you were suffering. I'm truly sorry. I deeply regret it and won't do it again. So please.
I anticipated his next words and firmly interrupted. Sorry, but I can't take care of you. I'm still not over my menopausal disorder, and I can't trust your remorse. A desperate Elliot apologized profusely.
Please, I could end up in the hospital any time because my condition might worsen. I continue with medication, but proper diet management is essential, and I'm in trouble without you. Please, I'm begging you.
His apology seemed heartfelt. However, I knew from Cassie that this could just be a performance. She said that's what he does when he wants to make you seem heartless for not forgiving him after a deep apology. Remembering Cassie's words, I gently declined. I was overwhelmed with my own issues and not in a state to care for someone else. Living with Elliot again and taking care of him would only worsen my menopausal symptoms due to stress. I had just started to stabilize and didn't want to return to square one. I can't. If you really need care, use home care services or a helper. That's beyond me. I explained these options to Elliot, who was still pleading, and made it clear that I couldn't care for him and had no intention of living together again. Then I returned to my own life. Since then, my symptoms have settled, and I've returned to work after a hiatus. Though I considered retiring at one point, I needed to support myself living alone. I always found fulfillment in my job, and despite a 2-year and a few months gap, returning to work felt good. I have no intention of reconciling with Elliot or considering remarriage at this time. However, I still keep in touch with Elliot's family and occasionally meet them for meals. The regular family dinners, a long-standing tradition of Elliot's family, were discontinued after this incident. I also heard that Elliot, for some reason, quit his job. He claimed it was to focus on treatment, but his hospital visits haven't increased, nor has his diet improved. He seemed to be living on his early retirement funds for now. Yet he appears to be living in fear of an uncertain future due to his illness. I'm determined to take care of my health and live a fulfilling life for the remainder of my days.
I never knew how close I came to not existing. Mom told me years later that when she found out she was pregnant with me, she wasn't sure they could afford a kid. Dad wasn't making much, and they were barely scraping by. But then my dad's parents, my grandparents, found out about the pregnancy. Not only were they thrilled, but they went above and beyond. They gave Mom and Dad their house, a nice place in a good neighborhood, close to a great school. They even promised to help out with money. I was born into that house, and for the first few years, life was pretty good. Grandma and Grandpa were always around, picking me up, taking care of me when Mom was working. They'd take me to the park, read me stories, and sneak me treats when Mom wasn't looking. When I started school at 5, they'd pick me up every day. We'd go for ice cream or to the playground. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. But then, everything changed. I remember that night clearly. I was supposed to be asleep, but the yelling woke me up. Mom and Dad were having a huge fight. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard words like betrayal and how could you? Then I heard the front door slam. I peeked out my window and saw Dad stumbling to his car. He was holding a bottle. I later learned it was whiskey. I watched him drive off, tires screeching. That was the last time I saw my dad alive. The next morning, 2 police officers came to our door. Mom collapsed when they told her dad had been in an accident. He'd lost control of the car and driven off the road. He didn't make it. The funeral was a blur. I remember holding Mom's hand, confused about why Dad was in a box and why everyone was crying. Grandma and Grandpa were there, hugging me tightly, their faces streaked with tears. But after the funeral, things changed rapidly. Mom seemed to bounce back quickly, too quickly. Within months, she had a new man in her life. Before I knew it, they were married, and Mom was pregnant again. "You're going to have a little sister, Carol," Mom told me, her eyes shining. "Isn't that exciting?" I nodded, not sure how to feel. Everything was changing so fast, and I missed Dad. I missed Grandma and Grandpa too. They stopped coming around, and I didn't understand why. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit anymore?" I asked one day. Mom's face hardened. "They don't want anything to do with us anymore, Carol. They abandoned us because I've started a new family." Then her face softened. "At least they left us the house and helped with the money for your education. That's something to be thankful for." My little sister arrived a few months after Mom remarried. I remember Mom saying she was born prematurely, but even at my young age, something felt off about that explanation. Still, I was too preoccupied with the sudden changes in my life to question it much. My new stepfather, Frank, worked as a driver. Mom kept her job as a salesperson. We weren't rich by any means, but we always had enough for the essentials. At least, that's what I was told. From the start, it was clear that Frank didn't like me much. He'd glare at me across the dinner table, his jaw clenching whenever I spoke. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd snap at Mom. "I'm trying to eat in peace here." Mom would rush to placate him. "Carol, honey, why don't you go to your room? I'll bring you your dinner later." As time went on, these moments became more frequent. Frank's temper was short, and everything seemed to set him off, especially me. He'd call me names when Mom wasn't around, his face twisted in disgust. "You're nothing but a freeloader," he'd spit. "A burden. You know that, right?" I'd nod silently, fighting back tears. What else could I do? The contrast between how Frank treated me and my sister was stark. With her, he was all smiles and affection. He'd bounce her on his knee, shower her with gifts, and speak to her in a sickeningly sweet voice that made my stomach turn. "There's my little angel," he'd coo. "Daddy's got a surprise for you." Mom, desperate to keep Frank happy, started finding ways to keep me out of sight. She'd usher me to my room whenever Frank came home, locking the door behind me. I'd sit there for hours, listening to the sounds of a happy family on the other side, laughter, conversation, the clink of cutlery on plates. I didn't understand why I had to eat alone in my room, why I couldn't move freely in my own home, why I was treated like an unwelcome guest. As I grew older, the isolation intensified. Family holidays? I wasn't invited. Trips to visit Frank's friends and relatives? I was left behind. Even when people came to our house, I was told to stay in my room and keep quiet. "We don't want to upset Frank," Mom would say, her eyes pleading. "You know how he gets." And I did know. I'd seen his rages, heard the crashes and bangs when something set him off. So I stayed quiet. I stayed out of the way. I became a ghost in my own home. The only times I felt any semblance of normalcy were the rare occasions when Mom would take me shopping or run errands with her. But even then, there was no room for fun or freedom. It was all business, quick and efficient, always with an eye on the clock. "We can't be too long," Mom would say, checking her watch nervously. "Frank will be home soon." As the years passed, I retreated further into myself. I became shy, withdrawn. At school, I barely spoke to anyone. But in the privacy of my room, in the worlds I created in my mind, I found an escape. I'd make up stories, grand adventures where I was the hero, where I was wanted and loved. When I turned 16, my life took an unexpected turn. Spending most of my time alone in my room, I'd become pretty good at using the internet to escape my reality. One day, I stumbled upon an online publishing house that was looking for fresh voices in children's and young adult literature. On a whim, I submitted some of my stories. To my shock, they loved them. Before I knew it, I was working with them regularly, writing stories and helping develop educational apps for kids and teens. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. My ideas were popular, my stories were being published, and best of all, I was earning my own money. I saved every penny I could, watching my bank account grow with a sense of excitement I'd never felt before. One day, feeling particularly bold after a big payment came through, I decided to share my success with Mom. We were alone in the kitchen, Frank was out on a long-haul drive, and my sister was at a friend's house. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little, "I've got something to tell you. I've been working for this publishing house, writing stories and stuff. And, well, I'm making pretty good money." Mom's eyes widened. "Really? Oh, Carol, that's wonderful. I always knew you were a smart girl." Her praise, so rare these days, made me glow. But then her expression changed, becoming calculating. "You know," she said, leaning in close, "this is perfect timing. We've been having some financial troubles lately." My heart sank. I should have known better than to hope for simple pride or happiness. "The thing is," Mom continued, "this house is so big, and the upkeep is expensive. And well, raising you hasn't been cheap either. We've been exhausted trying to provide for you all these years." I felt like I'd been slapped. Hadn't I been the one locked away, barely even part of the family? How had I been such a burden? "Remember that college fund we set aside for you?" Mom said, not meeting my eyes. "Well, we had to use that money. For the house, you know. But now that you're earning your own money, you can support yourself, right?" I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. "That's my girl," Mom said, patting my hand. "Oh, and one more thing. Frank and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you move out after you graduate. We're planning to renovate your room for your sister. She needs more space, you understand." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Move out? But, where will I go?" Mom shrugged, already turning away. "You're a smart girl, Carol. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You've got some savings now, right?" As she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone, the full weight of her words hit me. I was being kicked out. The money I thought would be my ticket to college was gone. And my own mother didn't seem to care where I ended up. The months leading up to graduation were a blur of anxiety and desperate planning. I threw myself into my schoolwork during the day, determined to at least finish high school strong. At night, I worked tirelessly on my writing projects, trying to save every penny I could. But no matter how I crunched the numbers, it wasn't enough. College tuition, living expenses, books, it all added up to way more than I had or could hope to earn in time. The realization that my dreams of higher education were slipping away hit me hard. I tried to talk to Mom about it once, hoping against hope that she'd have a change of heart. "Mom, I've been looking at college costs, and I don't think I can." She cut me off before I could finish. "Carol, we've been over this. You're on your own now. You'll figure it out." The day of graduation came and went. I should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, I felt numb. The next morning, Mom appeared in my doorway with a couple of cardboard boxes. "Time to pack up, Carol," she said, her tone eerily cheerful. "Your sister's so excited about her new room." I packed my life into those boxes, fighting back tears. When I was done, Mom helped me carry them to the front door. As I stood on the porch, my meager possessions at my feet, Mom gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Good luck out there," she said, and then the door closed behind her. I stood there for a moment, shell-shocked. Then, taking a deep breath, I picked up my boxes and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. With what little money I had, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. It was in a sketchy part of town, and the sound of sirens often kept me up at night, but it was mine. I decided to postpone college for a year, I had no choice, really, and focus on work. I reached out to my contacts at the publishing house, practically begging for more work. To my relief, they were more than happy to oblige. "We've been impressed with your work, Carol," my editor told me. "How would you feel about writing some children's books for us?" I jumped at the opportunity. Soon, I was working around the clock, churning out stories and illustrations. The work was demanding, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was good at something, like I had a purpose. Living alone wasn't easy, but I was used to fending for myself. I learned to budget, to cook simple meals, to navigate the public transit system. I even made a few friends in the building, other young people trying to make it on their own. But despite my best efforts, saving for college remained a distant dream. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, some new expense would crop up. A plumbing emergency in my apartment, a laptop repair, a trip to the doctor when I caught a nasty flu, each setback ate into my savings. It had been a year since I'd left home when my phone rang with a number I never expected to see again. My mother's voice came through, sickly sweet and unfamiliar. "Carol, sweetie, how are you? I've missed you so much. Why don't you come visit us this weekend?" Suspicion immediately flared in my gut, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to visit, packing an overnight bag with a mix of anticipation and dread. As soon as I arrived at my old home, my suspicions were confirmed. Mom was overly affectionate, hugging me tightly and peppering me with questions about my life. It felt artificial, like watching a bad actress perform. "Oh, Carol," she cooed, "you must be tired from your trip. Why don't you sleep in your sister's room tonight? She can take the guest room." I nodded, bemused. My sister, now a teenager, rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The next morning, I woke to the sound of familiar voices downstairs. Curious, I made my way to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway. Sitting at the table were two elderly people I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly, my grandparents, my dad's parents. Grandma's eyes lit up when she saw me. "Carol, oh, look how you've grown." I stood there, shocked, as they explained why they were there. "We're moving to a nursing home soon," Grandpa said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But before we go, we wanted to make sure you're doing well. That you're prospering." "Yes," Grandma chimed in, "tell us all about your college. What are you studying, dear?" I opened my mouth, not sure what to say, when Mom jumped in. "Oh, Carol's doing wonderfully at school. Aren't you, honey? Top of her class, just like always." I stared at her, unable to believe the lies flowing so easily from her lips. My grandparents looked pleased, but they still had questions. "That's wonderful," Grandma said. "Could we talk to Carol alone for a bit? We'd love to catch up." A flash of panic crossed Mom's face. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Carol's quite busy, aren't you, dear? In fact, we should probably wrap this up soon." She quickly steered the conversation to other topics, barely letting me get a word in. As the visit came to an end, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Grandma pressed something into my hand, a business card. As soon as my grandparents left, the change in Mom was immediate. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent expression I knew all too well. "Well, that's done," she said, clearing the table briskly. "You should probably head home now, Carol, I'm sure you have things to do." I stood there, the business card burning a hole in my pocket, as Mom all but pushed me out the door. The warmth and affection of moments ago were gone, replaced by the cool detachment I'd grown up with. As soon as I got back to my tiny apartment, I pulled out the business card my grandmother had slipped me. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" My grandmother's voice came through, warm and familiar, despite the years. "Grandma, it's Carol," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We talked for a while, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and concern. Before I knew it, we'd arranged for her and Grandpa to visit me the next day. I gave them my apartment address, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. As soon as I hung up, I threw myself into a cleaning frenzy. My small studio apartment wasn't much, but I was determined to make it as welcoming as possible. I scrubbed every surface, organized my meager belongings, and even managed to find a vase for some fresh flowers I picked up from the corner store. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I spent hours in the tiny kitchenette, preparing lunch for tomorrow. I even decided to bake Grandma's favorite cookies, snickerdoodles, using a recipe I'd found online. Morning came too quickly. I was just pulling the last batch of cookies from the oven when there was a knock at the door. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my shirt and went to answer it. There they stood, Grandma and Grandpa. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, years of separation hanging between us. Then Grandma stepped forward, enveloping me in a tight hug. "Oh, Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at you, all grown up." As I ushered them inside, I saw their eyes widen as they took in my small apartment. Confusion flickered across their faces. "Carol," Grandpa said slowly, "why are you living here? Your mother told us you were living in the house." Before I could even begin to explain, they launched into a story that turned my world upside down. "We've always wanted to be part of your life," Grandma said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But your mother, she kept us away." They told me about the night my father died, the real story. My mother had been unfaithful. She was already pregnant with my sister when my father found out. He wanted a divorce, but then the accident happened. I sat there, stunned, as they continued. "The house I grew up in, the one Mom and Frank still lived in, was mine. Left to me in my father's will. We've been sending money for your care every month," Grandma said, reaching for my hand. "After you graduated, we increased the amount, thinking you were in college and needed more." The room seemed to spin. All this time, struggling to make ends meet, and there had been money meant for me? A house in my name? "We wanted to make sure you were living comfortably in the house, that everything was okay," Grandpa added. "That's why we came to visit yesterday." As I sat there, staring at my grandparents in disbelief, the weight of their words slowly sank in. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness for the childhood I never had. "I don't understand," I stammered. "All this time, there was money for me? A house in my name?" Grandma squeezed my hand tightly. "Tell us everything, Carol. We need to know what really happened." And so, I did. I told them about my lonely childhood, confined to my room like a dirty secret. I spoke of Frank's hostility, of always feeling like a burden. I explained how the money for college had been taken away, how I'd been kicked out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "I'd been working nonstop," I said, my voice cracking. "Writing children's books, living in this tiny apartment, trying to save for college. I never knew about any maintenance money." As I spoke, I watched my grandparents' expressions change from shock to fury. Grandpa's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "What your mother has done, it's theft, it's abuse. We're going to make this right, Carol. I promise you that." True to their word, my grandparents sprang into action. They hired a lawyer, one of the best in the city. Over the next few weeks, I watched in awe as they fought tirelessly on my behalf. The court case was brutal. Mom and Frank tried to paint me as a rebellious, ungrateful child who had run away. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed years of diverted funds. Neighbors testified about my isolation. In the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in our favor, evicting Mom and Frank from the house that was rightfully mine. The back payments of maintenance money were ordered to be paid to me in full. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? The family I had known, dysfunctional as it was gone forever. But I had a new family now. Grandma and Grandpa were determined to make up for lost time. They helped me move into my house, a concept I was still struggling to grasp. They gave me money for tuition and sat with me for hours, helping me choose the right college. I decided on a school close to the nursing home where they were moving. It felt right, being near them after all these years apart. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I visited Grandma and Grandpa often, soaking up their love and wisdom. We'd play cards, watch old movies, and talk for hours. They told me stories about my dad, filling in the blanks of my own history. But life, I was learning, had a cruel way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. Just as I was settling into my new life, reveling in the love of my grandparents, tragedy struck. Grandpa went first. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. Grandma followed barely 2 months later. The doctors said it was natural causes, but I knew the truth, she'd lost her will to live without him. Once again, I found myself alone. The grief was overwhelming. I'd only just found them, only just started to heal the wounds of my past, and now they were gone. I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the pain. But every empty holiday, every milestone I couldn't share with them, was a fresh wound. Years passed, and life took on a rhythm I never thought possible. I graduated college with honors, landing a job at a prestigious publishing house, the same one that had given me my first break as a teenager. With the inheritance from my grandparents, I bought a cozy apartment close to work, a place that was truly mine. My financial situation had dramatically improved. I rented out my grandparents' house and my childhood home, providing a steady stream of additional income. For the first time in my life, I felt secure, stable, and most importantly, happy. I had friends, a fulfilling career, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One sunny afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly, my mother's. With a mix of curiosity and dread, I answered. "Carol?" Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false affection. "Sweetie, how are you?" Before I could respond, she launched into a sob story. My sister was pregnant, abandoned by her husband. They were all living together, Mom, Frank, and my sister, crammed into a tiny rented apartment. "We have nowhere to go," Mom whimpered. "I was hoping, well, that house you own, your childhood home. Could we maybe stay there? Just until we get back on our feet." I listened in stunned silence as she alternated between begging and crying, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I remembered all too well from my childhood. "Please, Carol," she pleaded. "We're family. We need your help." As she spoke, memories flooded back. The lonely nights locked in my room. The years of neglect and emotional abuse. The day she kicked me out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "Family?" I finally spoke, my voice cold. "That's rich coming from you, Mom. Where was this family when you locked me away like a dirty secret? Where was it when you kicked me out with nowhere to go?" "Carol, that's all in the past." "No," I cut her off. "It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. You're only reaching out because you need something from me. Just like always." I could almost hear her scrambling, trying to find the right words to manipulate me. But I wasn't that scared, lonely girl anymore. "You want my advice, Mom? Solve your own problems. Figure it out on your own. Isn't that what you told me when you threw me out?" "But Carol." "Good luck," I said, echoing her words from years ago. "You're going to need it." Without waiting for a response, I hung up. My hand shook as I blocked her number, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of her rejection, her neglect. But now, I was finally free.
Full-time care, we decided to live together. So, Scott decided to build a duplex. It was the first time Karen showed an interest in the duplex, and I showed her the predicted images and blueprints, somewhat intrigued. Karen hardly ever visits her parents' house, but she might be interested in the house her parents are going to live in. She asked me to confirm the number of rooms and how much sunlight it gets, so I assured her there were no issues. She also asked about the date we planned to move, and when I told her, she just said, "I see," and left, leaving her children behind. I had a bad feeling about this, but at the time, I didn't take it too seriously. Then, eventually, we decided to move into the two-family home. My in-laws moved in a few days later, and our life living with Scott and his parents began. Living together was really smooth, with no issues. Feeling blessed with such kind in-laws, one day Karen, Scott's sister, showed up out of the blue. Of course, she brought her 4 kids with her, ushered them into the new house, and without looking at her kids at all, she said to me, "Hey Emma, we need to talk." While the in-laws, who hadn't seen their grandchildren in a while, were being harried, I was forcibly taken out to the hallway. I was worrying if my in-laws, who had recently been complaining about back problems, could take care of those kids, when Karen said something outrageous. "Hey, why don't you and Scott leave this house?" What? I was taken aback by the words I hadn't anticipated, but Karen continued without caring about my reaction. "Surely, Dad and Mom would rather live with me than with you who can't even show them a grandchild. And more than anything, I'm their real daughter, connected by blood. We're moving in here, so you guys should get out soon." While stroking her growing belly, Karen said arrogantly. Karen's plan was probably to live with my in-laws and have them take care of the kids. She said, "Look, Dad and Mom are so happy to be able to take care of their grandkids," and pointed at the in-laws who were struggling with their rowdy grandkids. I couldn't see any joy on their faces, but I knew Karen wouldn't listen no matter how much I argued. My anger at Karen for mocking my infertility had been building up, and I was extremely angry at Karen for forcing her children onto my kind in-laws. After pondering what could be done, an idea came to me and I quietly nodded. "Okay, we'll move out." Karen happily set the schedule for when we would move out and when they would move in, and left the kids behind again, but I felt relieved thinking this was a chance to sever ties with Karen. Time passed, and the day came when Karen's family moved into the 2-family house that Scott had built. As I wondered if they had moved in successfully, my phone rang. It was Karen. When I answered the phone, I heard a screech-like voice from Karen on the other side. "What the hell is this? Why haven't you moved out your stuff? There's no place for our stuff, and where did Dad and Mom go?" Scott and I and his parents had left the 2-family house, but we hadn't brought all the furniture. Karen was angry about this, and I responded, "The conversation was so sudden, so we only moved out for now. Your in-laws are with us." "Outrageous!" Karen fired back words like a boomerang. "I think it's outrageous that you and your husband are moving into the house Scott built without our consent. It's also outrageous to force the kids on us like that and go out having fun when we've been telling you every time that it's hard to take care of the kids." "That's not the point right now. Can I just throw away any of the remaining furniture that I don't like?" "Feel free to do so if you're really planning to move in. But are you sure about this?" "What are you talking about?" To the irritated Karen, I broke the news. "Can you and your husband handle the mortgage for that house? It's a 2-family house and quite a large one, so it's quite expensive." By that time, I had already told her numerous lies. The acceptance I had given her about moving in was also a lie. There was no way I could agree to Karen trying to take over the duplex that my husband Scott had built. It's only natural that the furniture is left at home because Scott, his parents, and I are currently on vacation at Yellowstone National Park. The truth about the house is that it was fully paid for with the savings of Scott, myself, and his parents. There's actually no mortgage, but that lie was enough to scare Karen. Scott and his parents were also aware of this strategy. When Karen demanded to talk to Scott, he switched to a mischievous look and lied the same way I had, saying that there was still a mortgage. Over the phone, Karen apparently started crying because she couldn't afford the payments. She decided to return to her previous home with her husband Rob and their children after being told by Scott that she could still back out and that we were also returning home. Upon returning to our home, which had just narrowly avoided being taken over by Karen, she immediately stormed over in a fury. "You never told us there was still a mortgage. Why did you keep it from us?" Karen yelled at us. When I casually replied, "Because you never asked," Karen's face turned even redder. The kids were so happy, thinking this house would be ours. You've disappointed them too. That's why you can't get pregnant. You need to make up for it by properly taking care of the kids. Even though playing with the kids is no big deal, it's better than doing nothing. Listening to Karen's rant, my normally quiet mother-in-law stood up and slapped her on the cheek. Surprised that my usually calm mother-in-law had reacted so strongly, she then addressed Karen with an unexpectedly sharp tone. You can't even handle that no big deal task of playing with the kids, instead of dumping it on Emma. You were planning to move into this duplex just to force your childcare responsibilities onto us, weren't you? I was willing to help if you were struggling to raise your children alone, but who would want to assist a daughter who offloads her parenting duties onto others and acts all high and mighty? Leave this house immediately, and don't ever come back. Aren't you on my side, Mom? I'm your real daughter, aren't I? In response to Karen's half-crying words, my always quiet father-in-law spoke up. It's because you are our real daughter that it's so disgraceful. I even feel guilty for raising such a selfish daughter. I've heard from Scott, you've been ridiculing Emma for her difficulty in having a baby. That's something no one should do. Karen glared at me fiercely. I felt a slight pity for Karen, who would be alone from now on, as I opened the front door for her. As both your mother and father have said, please leave. I don't intend to help with your child's care anymore, so please do your best. You people are monsters! Karen left the house in tears, and after that, she never set foot in our house again. When Karen came to our house, Scott was out at work. He got a call from her later. It seems it was hard to understand Karen's words as she was sobbing uncontrollably, but apparently her household was already in dire financial straits. Karen had been spending money on beauty salons and manicures, while Rob had been squandering money on lottery tickets. Karen, now running out of savings, apparently thought moving into the duplex that Scott had built would save them from paying rent and utilities. When Karen asked Scott, who earns considerably more than the average income, for financial help, he couldn't forgive her for ridiculing my infertility. Scott told her that all they had to do was cut back on beauty treatments and lotto tickets, but Karen cried, saying she didn't want to. There was no way he could financially aid such an arrogant person, even if she was his real sister. Eventually, Rob ran out of money to buy lottery tickets and had to take a side job after his main work to make ends meet. Karen also lost her money to spend on beauty treatments. She used to look quite put together, but a few months after a falling out with Scott, she was almost unrecognizable. When we bumped into her, Scott had to point out, "Isn't that Karen?" before I realized it was her. Still, her kid seems lively and happy around her, and that was a good thing. And here's the miracle part of the story. I found out that I'm pregnant, with twins nonetheless. I couldn't stop my tears when the doctor told me. Scott, who had come with me, also cried out of happiness as we shared our joy together. My in-laws were also thrilled that they were finally going to have the child we'd always wanted. I haven't mentioned this to Scott, but I secretly think that being free from the stress I was getting from Karen contributed to me getting pregnant. I feel gratitude and nothing else when I think about how Scott and my in-laws chose to stand with me, not Karen, and because of that, I was blessed with 2 lives. Nowadays, I hope from the bottom of my heart that the babies in my belly will be born healthy.
I never expected my life to implode over a celebratory dinner. Funny how the universe has a way of pulling the rug out just when you think you've got everything figured out. My name is Avery, and until last night, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 15 years with my college sweetheart, Elliot, and we'd finally paid off our mortgage. I'd spent the afternoon preparing his favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables. His father Henry was coming over to celebrate with us, and I wanted everything to be perfect. The first sign something was wrong came when Elliot texted that he'd be slightly delayed. He was usually punctual to a fault. Henry arrived first, bringing an expensive bottle of champagne and his trademark bear hug. "Where's that son of mine?" Henry asked, helping me arrange the table settings. Running late, I said, checking my phone again. He said he'd be here soon. The Wellington was starting to dry out when we finally heard Elliot's key in the lock. But the footsteps in the hallway sounded different. There were 2 sets. Sorry I'm late, Elliot called out. I brought someone I'd like you both to meet. I stepped into the hallway, wiping my hands on my apron. That's when I saw her, tall, willowy, probably mid-20s. She had the kind of effortless beauty that made my carefully applied makeup feel like a child's finger painting. This is Sienna, Elliot said, his hand resting on the small of her back. Something in his tone made my stomach drop.
My future wife.
The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, trying to process his words while simultaneously wondering if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate reality. Henry's champagne glass shattered on the hardwood floor. What the hell are you talking about, son? Henry's voice was dangerously quiet. Elliot straightened his shoulders, pulling Sienna closer. I've filed for divorce. Sienna and I are getting married as soon as it's finalized. I watched as if from outside my body as Sienna extended her hand toward me, a diamond ring catching the light. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. Elliot wanted to tell you privately, but I insisted on being here. I thought it would be...
Kinda.
Henry's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You thought ambushing my daughter-in-law at a family celebration would be kinder? Dad, please. Elliot cut in.
This isn't about you.
Avery and I have grown apart. These things happen. I found my voice then, though it came out barely above a whisper. Grown apart? When exactly did we grow apart, Elliot? Between breakfast this morning when you kissed me goodbye, or lunch when you texted to say you loved me? Sienna shifted uncomfortably, but Elliot's face remained impassive. I've already moved most of my things to Sienna's place. I'll come by tomorrow to get the rest. The smell of burning meat finally registered. The Wellington was ruined. Just like my marriage. Just like the life I thought I had. The house. I managed to say, we just paid it off. We'll sell it. Elliot replied smoothly. Split the proceeds. It's only fair. Henry stepped forward, positioning himself between us. Fair? You want to talk about fair, son? After this little stunt. But Elliot was already turning away, guiding Sienna toward the door. We should go. My lawyer will be in touch. Avery. As they left, I caught Sienna glancing back at me. Something unreadable in her expression. Was it guilt? Triumph? I couldn't tell. But I did notice how her hand trembled slightly as she gripped Elliot's arm. Henry's warm hand found my shoulder. We'll fight this, sweetheart. Whatever it takes. I nodded, still staring at the door where my husband had just walked out with his future wife. The funny thing was, beneath the shock and heartbreak, another emotion was starting to surface, one that surprised me with its intensity.
Rage.
I spent that first night at Henry and Linda's house, curled up in their guest room like a teenager who just had her heart broken at prom. Only this was so much worse. This was 15 years of my life going up in flames. Linda brought me chamomile tea and sat on the edge of the bed, her presence as comforting as it had been since the day I met her. I always thought if any of my children were going to do something stupid, it would be Rachel or Tom, she said, referring to Elliot's siblings. Never Elliot. I keep thinking I must have missed something, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Some sign that he was unhappy. Don't do that to yourself, Linda's voice was firm. Sometimes people just
change.
Or maybe they show you who they really were all along. Henry appeared in the doorway, his phone in hand. His face was tight with anger. Just got off the phone with Elliot. He's already moved most of his things out of the house. Says he left you a list of what he's taking. How generous of him, I muttered, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. He also mentioned something about selling the house. Henry continued, watching me carefully. Says you two discussed it. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. Discussed it? He announced it right after introducing his child bride. She's 28, Linda said quietly. You knew about her? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Linda shook her head quickly.
God, no.
I looked her up on social media while you were in the shower. She works at Elliot's firm. Junior associate.
Of course she did.
The pieces were starting to fall into place. All those late nights at the office. The business trips that seemed to multiply over the past year. I need to go back to the house, I said suddenly, pushing aside the blankets. I need to see what he's taken. It's almost midnight, Henry protested. Please, I said. I won't be able to sleep anyway. The drive was silent, but I could feel Henry and Linda exchanging worried glances in the front seat. When we pulled up to the house, another car was parked in the driveway. Elliot's BMW. My heart started pounding as we approached the front door. Inside, we could hear movement and voices. I used my key, pushing the door open to find Elliot and Sienna in my living room, boxing up books. "Oh," Sienna said, straightening up quickly. "We thought you'd stay away tonight." "Clearly," I replied, taking in the scene. Half the bookshelves were empty, and several paintings were missing from the walls. "Making yourself a home with my things?" "Our things," Elliot corrected, not meeting my eyes. "I'm only taking what's mine." "The first edition Vonnegut collection?" I pointed to a box by his feet. "The ones I spent 3 years tracking down for your birthdays?" "Elliot," Henry's voice carried a warning. "Put them back." "Dad, stay out of this." "Like hell I will." Henry stepped forward. "You want to throw away your marriage? Fine. But you don't get to strip this house bare while you're at it." Sienna touched Elliot's arm. "Maybe we should come back another time." "No," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "You both stay right there. I want to watch while you pack up 15 years of memories like they're worth nothing. I want to see exactly who you are, Elliot." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Elliot's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt? Shame? But then Sienna squeezed his arm, and his face hardened again. "The lawyer will sort out the property division," he said coldly. "Until then, I'm taking what I need." Linda stepped forward, positioning herself between us. "What you need. Or what she wants." She gestured toward Sienna, who flinched slightly. As I watched them continue packing, something shifted inside me. The heartbreak was still there, but it was being overshadowed by something else, a determination I didn't know I possessed. "Take whatever you want," I said quietly. "But remember this moment, Elliot. Remember exactly how this feels." He paused, a book halfway to the box. "Is that a threat?" I smiled, and for the first time that night, it felt genuine. "No, honey, it's a promise." The next morning, I decided to face reality head-on. While Elliot was at work, I went through our home office, gathering every financial document I could find. 15 years of marriage generates a lot of paperwork, and I was determined to understand exactly where we stood. That's when I found it, buried in a folder marked House Payments 2018. A statement from my personal savings account showing a transfer of $90,000. My inheritance from my grandmother, which I'd used to save our house during Elliot's failed attempt at starting his own law firm. My hands were shaking as I dug deeper. More documents emerged, proof of my contributions to mortgage payments while Elliot was between jobs. Receipts for home improvements I'd paid for with my teaching salary. The story they told was very different from Elliot's version of events. "Did you know about the money?" I asked when he picked up. "What money?" "The $90,000 I put into the house. The money that kept us from foreclosure when Elliot's firm went under." There was a long pause. "No," Henry said finally. "He told us he'd borrowed it from a friend." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Afriennamedme." "Stay there," Henry said. "I'm coming over." But before Henry arrived, I heard a key in the lock. Elliot walked in, Sienna trailing behind him like a shadow. "More packing?" I asked, gesturing to the empty boxes they carried. "Just getting the last of my clothes," Elliot said, then noticed the papers spread across the desk. "What are you doing?" "Remembering," I said, holding up the bank statement. "Remember 2018, Elliot? When your big dream of starting your own firm crashed and burned. Remember who bailed you out?" Sienna looked between us, confusion clear on her face. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," Elliot said quickly. "Ancient history." $90,000 worth of ancient history, I corrected. "My inheritance. The money that saved this house. Our house when you nearly lost it." Elliot's face reddened. "That was a loan." "A loan?" I stood up, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. "Show me the paperwork, Elliot. Show me where we agreed it was a loan." "You're my wife," he snapped. Everything between us was shared. Was, I emphasized, past tense. Just like this house will be past tense when you sell it and split the proceeds. Except, I don't think that's going to work out quite like you planned. The front door opened again, and Henry walked in. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Elliot and Sienna. "Perfect timing," I said. Elliot was just explaining how my inheritance doesn't count toward house ownership. Is that so? Henry's voice was dangerously quiet. Interesting legal theory, son. Want to run that by the Bar Association? Sienna stepped forward, her confidence visibly wavering. Maybe we should discuss this another time, when everyone's calmer. I am calm, I said, gathering the documents into a neat pile. In fact, I'm clearer than I've been in days. You want to sell the house, Elliot?
Fine.
But first, we're going to talk about my $90,000 and the mortgage payments and every penny I put into this place while you were chasing your dreams. You can't prove, Elliot started. Actually, Henry interrupted. She can. And she will. I've already called my lawyer. He's very interested in these documents. The color drained from Elliot's face. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw real fear in his eyes. This isn't what we discussed, Sienna said quietly to Elliot. You said it would be simple. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Nothing's ever simple when you build your happiness on someone else's pain, Sienna. That's a free lesson for you. As they left, without the boxes they'd brought, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked different somehow. Stronger. More determined. Henry squeezed my shoulder. You okay? No, I admitted. But I will be. And so will my house. The papers on the desk represented more than just money now. They were proof that I wasn't just a victim in Elliot's story. I was the author of my own. And I was just getting started. Henry's lawyer, Marcus, spread the documents across his mahogany desk like he was dealing cards. Each paper told a piece of our story, my story, but it wasn't until I saw them all together that I realized just how much of myself I'd poured into that house. The good news, Marcus said, adjusting his reading glasses, is that we have clear documentation of your financial contributions. The bad news is that Elliot's already filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Linda, who'd insisted on coming with me, leaned forward. But that doesn't change Avery's claim to the house, does it? Not directly, but... Marcus paused as his phone buzzed. His expression shifted as he read the message. Well, this is interesting. Elliot just listed the house for sale. My stomach dropped. He can't do that without my signature. Actually, he can. He's listed his intention to sell his portion of the property. And he's already received an offer. I gripped the armrests of my chair, trying to steady myself. From who? The buyer's name is redacted, but the offer is well above market value. Marcus removed his glasses. This feels calculated, Avery. Like someone's trying to force your hand. A memory surfaced, Sienna mentioning her family's real estate business during that awful dinner. The pieces clicked into place. It's her, I said. Sienna's family is trying to buy me out. Linda's hand found mine. You don't have to sell. No, but they can make my life difficult until I do. I stood up, needing to move. This was their plan all along, wasn't it? Get the house. Erase me completely. Marcus shuffled through more papers. There's something else you should see. He handed me a bank statement, Elliot's personal account. Notice the transfers starting last year? I scanned the document, my vision blurring as I processed what I was seeing. Regular transfers to an offshore account, starting just after I'd received my second inheritance following my aunt's death. He's been moving money, I whispered. My money. We can't prove it yet, Marcus said gently. But the timing. The timing is exactly when I told him about Aunt Sarah's inheritance. My laugh sounded hollow even to my own ears. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was stealing from me. Linda stood up, her face flushed with anger. That son of a... A knock at the door interrupted her. Henry entered, looking grave. Sorry I'm late. I just had an interesting conversation with Rachel. Elliot's sister? I asked. What did she say? Apparently, Sienna's been bragging at work about their plans for the house. They're going to tear it down, build something new. She called it erasing the past to build their future. The room spun slightly. That house wasn't just property. It was where I'd planted my grandmother's roses, where I'd nursed Elliot through pneumonia, where I'd dreamed of raising our children. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. They don't get to erase me. Marcus leaned back in his chair. What do you want to do? I looked at the documents spread across his desk, proof of my contributions, my sacrifices, my life. Then I thought about Sienna's smug smile, Elliot's cold dismissal of our years together. I want everything, I said. The house, the money he stole, all of it. And I want them to remember what it feels like to have something taken from you. Henry stepped forward. I might be able to help with that. I still have connections at the firm's board of directors, and they'd be very interested in knowing about those offshore transfers. Are you sure? Linda asked him. He's still our son. Henry's face hardened. No son of mine steals from his wife and tries to destroy her home. We raised him better than that. I gathered the documents, my hands steady now. Marcus, what's our next move? He smiled, and there was something predatory in it. We go to war. As we left the office, I caught my reflection in the window again. The woman looking back at me wasn't just angry anymore. She was dangerous. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly powerful. Elliot wanted to erase our past?
Fine.
But first, I was going to make damn sure he remembered it. Sunday brunch wasn't my idea. Linda suggested it, with that gleam in her eye that told me she was plotting something. We're still family, she said. And family shows up. That's how I found myself sitting across from Elliot and Sienna at the Grove, the restaurant where we'd had our rehearsal dinner 15 years ago. Henry and Linda flanked me like bodyguards, while Rachel, Elliot's sister, completed our awkward party. The house is looking lovely, Linda said, stirring her coffee. Those new curtains in the living room are interesting. Sienna brightened. Thank you. I picked them myself. The old ones were so dated. The ones Avery's grandmother made? Linda's voice could have frozen hell. Those curtains survived 3 generations. I watched Sienna's smile falter, noticed how Elliot's hand tightened around his water glass. Small victories. Actually, Rachel chimed in, I heard you're planning some bigger changes than curtains. Sienna shot her a warning look, but Rachel continued. The demolition plans look ambitious. Though I suppose starting fresh is easier than dealing with all those memories. The table went silent. I carefully set down my fork, meeting Elliot's eyes. Demolition plans? It's not final, he said quickly. We're just exploring options. Options that include destroying the house my grandmother helped us buy. My voice remained steady, even as my hands shook under the table. The house where your father taught you to fix that squeaky floorboard in the hallway? Where your mother planted her prize-winning roses? Those roses are half dead anyway, Sienna interjected. The whole garden needs those roses. Tending those bushes longer than you've been alive, young lady. Sienna flushed. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. I said quietly. You meant exactly what you said. Just like you meant it when you told your colleague that erasing the past was the only way to build your future. Elliot's head snapped up. How did you? Word gets around, Rachel said, sipping her mimosa. Especially when someone's bragging about their renovation plans at the company holiday party. This is ridiculous, Sienna pushed back from the table. We don't need permission to change our house. Your house? Linda's eyebrows rose. Last I checked, you don't own anything there, dear. Not yet, anyway. The sale is practically final, Sienna snapped. My family's offer. Sienna, Elliot warned, but it was too late. Your family's offer? I leaned forward. So, it was your parents trying to buy me out?
Força seio.
Nobody's forcing anything, Elliot said, but his face had gone pale. No. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos I'd taken of those bank statements. Like nobody forced those transfers to your offshore account? The ones that started right after my aunt died. The color drained from his face. Sienna looked between us, confusion clear in her expression. What transfers? She asked. Nothing, Elliot said quickly. It's not what you think, Avery. I think it's exactly what it looks like. Henry's voice was cold. And I think the firm's ethics board will think so too. Sienna stood abruptly. I need some air. As she walked away, Elliot glared at me. Are you happy now? Destroying my relationship like I destroyed yours. No, Elliot, I said, standing up. I'm not happy, but I am done playing nice. You want to erase our past? Fine. But first, you're going to pay for it. Every penny you took, every memory you tried to steal, I'm coming for all of it. Rachel raised her glass. Now that's the sister-in-law I remember. Walking out of the restaurant, I felt lighter somehow. Let them tear down the house. Let them try to erase everything we built. Because now I had something better than a home. I had purpose. And watching Sienna cry in her car while Elliot stood helplessly beside it, that was just a bonus. Ready for the next phase? Henry asked as we reached our cars. I smiled, thinking of the documents waiting in Marcus's office. Oh, I'm just getting warmed up. The email from Marcus arrived at 3 a.m. House listing gone. Offer accepted. 3 words that made my world spin. I'd spent the last week gathering funds, liquidating investments, even considering a loan, all for nothing. Elliot and Sienna had won. I drove to the house in the pre-dawn darkness, needing to see it one last time. The garden was already showing signs of neglect. Linda's roses drooping, the lawn overgrown. Through the windows, I could see moving boxes stacked in the living room. My phone buzzed, Rachel calling. Did you hear? She asked without preamble. That your brother sold my life out from under me? Yeah, got the memo. No, Rachel's voice dropped. About Sienna's family. They're not just buying the house, they're buying the whole block. Some massive development project. They've been planning this for months. The pieces clicked into place. Elliot's sudden interest in Sienna, the rushed divorce, the offshore accounts. He knew, I whispered. He knew all along. There's more, Rachel hesitated. The firm's board meeting is tomorrow. They're making Elliot partner. I ended the call, my hands shaking. All those years supporting his career, and now he was getting everything he wanted. The promotion, the younger wife, the fresh start. While I sat in my car, watching the sun rise over the home I was about to lose. A tap on my window made me jump. Henry stood there holding 2 coffee cups. Thought I'd find you here, he said, handing me one as I got out. Linda's worried sick. I'm fine, I lied, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. Sure you are. He leaned against my car. That's why you're sitting outside your house at dawn, looking like you haven't slept in days. It's not my house anymore.
No.
Henry pulled out his phone, showing me an email. Because according to this, the Brooks family's offer just fell through. Something about irregularities in their financing. I straightened. What? Turns out some anonymous source tipped off their investors about certain ethical concerns. The whole deal's on hold pending investigation. How did you? I may be retired, Henry smiled, but I still know how to make a few calls. The house goes back on the market today. For a moment, hope flickered. Then reality crashed back. I still can't afford it. Not a loan. Who said anything about a loan? He handed me another document, a bank statement showing a transfer from his retirement account. Linda and I talked it over. Consider it an early inheritance. Henry, I can't. You can and you will.
His voice was firm.
That house isn't just yours and Elliot's. It's where Linda nursed me through cancer, where we celebrated every Christmas, where our grandchildren were supposed to play someday. He paused. Family protects family, even from itself. A car pulled into the driveway. Elliot's BMW. He got out looking disheveled, Sienna nowhere in sight. What are you doing here? He demanded, storming over. Saying goodbye, I replied, taking a sip of coffee. Unless what? Unless you'd like to hear my offer. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Your offer? With what money? With the money you stole from me, I said quietly.
Plus interest. Plus en riesse retirement fund.
Plus everything I've saved while you were playing house with Sienna. The color drained from his face. You're bluffing. Try me. I stepped closer. Or we can discuss those offshore accounts with the ethics board tomorrow, right before your partner announcement. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? You took everything from me, Elliot. My marriage, my future, my trust. But this house. I gestured to the building behind us. This is where I draw the line. He stared at me for a long moment, then at his father. Finally, his shoulders slumped. How much? As we hammered out the details, I watched the sun climb higher, casting long shadows across the lawn. Linda's roses seemed to straighten in the morning light, as if they knew they weren't going anywhere after all. Sometimes rock bottom isn't where you end. Sometimes it's where you finally find solid ground to push back up. And I was done falling. The ethics board meeting was scheduled for 9, but I arrived at the firm by 8, settling into the lobby with a cup of coffee and the morning paper. I wasn't there to attend, just to watch the aftermath. Rachel texted updates from inside. Board reviewing evidence now. Elliot looks like he's about to throw up. Good. At 8:45, Sienna burst through the lobby doors, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She stopped short when she saw me. What are you doing here? I folded my paper carefully. Waiting. For what? To see him lose everything. Her voice cracked slightly. Isn't taking the house enough? The house was mine to take back, I said, standing. Just like the partnership was his to lose. You vindictive bit. Careful, I interrupted. Your future father-in-law is about to lose his job. Might want to watch what you say to the person who is proof of your family's illegal development schemes. The color drained from her face. How did you?
No.
About how your family pressured other homeowners. About the falsified environmental reports. I smiled. Let's just say Rachel isn't the only one who pays attention at office parties. The elevator dinged, and Henry stepped out, his face grim. It's done. Sienna rushed past him toward the boardroom. Through the lobby windows, I could see Elliot emerging from the building's side entrance, his tie loose, his jacket missing. Go, Henry said softly. End this. I found Elliot in the parking garage, sitting on the concrete steps, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time since this began, I saw my husband, not the stranger who'd replaced him. Happy now? He asked, his voice hollow.
No.
I sat beside him, leaving space between us. I wanted you to feel what I felt, to know what it's like to have everything stripped away.
But now.
I gestured to his defeated posture. It doesn't feel like victory. They're launching a full investigation. The offshore accounts, the development deals, everything. He laughed bitterly. Sienna's family is probably already distancing themselves. Can't have their daughter married to a disgraced lawyer. Is that what you wanted? To be part of their world. I wanted. He paused, struggling. I wanted to be more than the scholarship kid who married his college sweetheart. More than the son who needed his father's connections to get ahead. So you became the man who betrayed everyone who loved him instead. He flinched. I never meant. To hurt me? To steal from me?
To destroy your home.
I stood up. The funny thing is, Elliot, you already were more. You were the man I believed in. The partner I supported. The person I trusted most in the world. Avery. But that man's gone now. I reached into my bag, pulling out an envelope. These are the original documents, the bank transfers, the development plans, everything. The board has copies, but these are yours. He took the envelope with trembling hands. Why? Because revenge doesn't taste as sweet as I thought it would. And because the man I married deserves one last chance to do the right thing. The right thing. Tell the truth, Elliot. About everything. The money, the schemes, all of it. Give people back their homes. Start over. He stared at the envelope for a long moment. And what about us? There is no us anymore. But maybe there can be peace. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. The roses, he said. Mom's roses. I told Sienna not to touch them, but she wouldn't listen. I should have fought harder for the things that mattered. I nodded, not turning back. Yes, you should have. The morning sun was bright as I emerged from the garage. Henry waited by my car, his face questioning. It's done, I said. And I looked back at the building, thinking of the man I'd left sitting in the darkness. Sometimes winning feels a lot like losing. Henry squeezed my shoulder. That's how you know you've won the right way. 6 months later, I stood in my garden, pruning Linda's roses back to health. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. The newspaper on my porch told the story in black and white. Brooks' development project canceled. Properties returned to original owners. Below that, a smaller headline. Former attorney makes full restitution to fraud victims. I hadn't seen Elliot since that day in the parking garage. Rachel kept me updated. Sienna left shortly after the scandal broke, and Elliot had moved back in with his parents while working to make amends. He'd sold everything he owned to repay what he'd stolen. The mail truck pulled up, and I recognized our regular carrier, Joe, waving as he approached. Special delivery, he said, handing me a thick envelope.
Needs a signature.
The return address made my heart skip. My mother's name, written in familiar cursive. We hadn't spoken since my father's funeral 12 years ago. Inside, I found a letter and an old photograph. The picture showed my mother in a garden much like mine, kneeling beside her own rose bushes. On the back, she'd written, "Some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth letting go." The doorbell rang as I was reading the letter. Linda stood there, holding a ceramic pot with a tiny rose bush. "Found this at the garden center," she said. "It's the same variety as the ones your grandmother gave us for your wedding." I led her to the backyard, where we'd been slowly rebuilding the garden. Henry had helped me install new beds, and Rachel had contributed some herbs. Even Tom, Elliot's younger brother, had shown up one weekend with mulch and tools. "I got a letter," I said, showing Linda the envelope. "From my mother." She nodded, unsurprised. I might have sent her a note, told her about everything that happened, about how strong you've been. Before I could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. Henry emerged, followed by Elliot. My first instinct was to retreat, but Linda's hand on my arm stopped me. "He asked to come," she said softly, "to see the roses." Elliot approached slowly, looking different than I remembered, humbler somehow, more like the boy I'd fallen in love with in college. He carried a small box. "I found these," he said, holding it out, "while packing in my parents' attic. Thought you might want them." Inside were packets of seeds, all carefully labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. Seeds we'd saved together from her garden, planning for our future. "The investigators finished with the offshore accounts," he said quietly. "Everything's been returned. I'm working at a legal aid clinic now, helping people fight predatory development deals." "Good," I said and meant it. "I'm sorry," he added. "Not just for the money or the house. For forgetting who we were. Who I was supposed to be." I looked at the seeds in my hands, then at my mother's letter. Sometimes we have to lose everything to remember what matters. "The roses look better," he observed, glancing at the garden. "They're survivors," Linda said, "like their caretaker." As they left, Elliot to his new life, Henry and Linda to their Sunday plans, I sat in my garden reading my mother's letter. She wrote about regret, about pride, about the years we'd lost to stubbornness and hurt, about wanting to try again. The final paragraph caught my throat. "I watched you fight for your home, for your dignity, for justice. You're stronger than I ever was. But strength isn't just about fighting. Sometimes it's about knowing when to open the door to second chances." I looked at my grandmother's seeds, at the newly thriving roses, at the home I'd fought so hard to keep. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd forgotten I still knew by heart. "Mom," I said when she answered, "the roses are blooming again. Would you like to see them?" Sometimes endings are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in what you keep, but in what you choose to let grow again.